Okay, let's go. Okay, so this session is about the flexible office opportunity build, buy, or partner, tech-enabled space, unlocking agile real estate and meeting growing occupier demand. Now, I've got a fantastic panel here. I've got Jamie Hodari, CEO and co-founder of Industrious, Kevin Danahy, Global Head of Corporate Development at Brookfield, and Mark Furness, founder and CEO of Essensis. So if you're going to get any sense, you're going to get it out of this group. Right, let's make an assumption, because we don't want to talk about the world as it is now. Let's make an assumption that we're either through the pandemic or we have developed ways to mitigate its impact. So we're in this future world. After a forced multi-month global experiment in remote working, we now have agency back and we can do what we want. So let's make one other assumption. During this period, we have realized, as have a lot of people and a lot of companies, that actually largely working from home works. So that is making us reconsider what types of real estate we really need. What is the purpose of an office? What should it be? What form factor should it take? And how should we procure it? So given that we're in a post-pandemic world, where does flex space sit in this post-pandemic world? So starting with the question, let's start with the occupier's point of view. So we're thinking about occupiers in a post-pandemic world. So what are the top 3 must-haves that occupiers will be thinking they need to get from their real estate? And maybe Kevin, would you like to start us off?
Sure.
Kevin, you just put yourself on mute.
Kevin, we've lost you.
Kevin.
Can you hear me now? Was I on mute?
Yeah,
sorry about that. Okay. But first, thanks to CREtech for having Brookfield here, and to my esteemed panelists. We're of the mind that there will be 3 things that occupiers and their employees will be looking for as they come back to the office, flexible workspace and otherwise. 1 is safety, 2 is an energized and activated environment, and 3 is digital infrastructure. And just to elaborate on that a little bit more, post-pandemic, there'll be a broader definition of safety. So after 9/11, which was another big crisis that we faced, physical safety was of paramount importance, and owners around the world have had to create that element as part of their built environment. The cybersecurity and a clean environment and safety from future pandemics will be and disease will be important. An energized environment where there's a live work play ecosystem immediately adjacent to the offices, we think will be important, as well as integrated within the building, that the flexible workspace and the long-term workspace will be. And then 3rd, digital infrastructure. Technology is part of our everyday lives, even more so as we're in this environment of work from home. And it's important for operators of flexible workspace and the owners of the property to significantly improve the digital infrastructure and the connectivity that the built environment has with the people who are coming in and out of the building, whether it's an office building, a retail environment, multifamily housing, etc. So safety, energized environment, and digital infrastructure are the 3 things that I think are going to be at the top of the list.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mark. The 3 most important things for occupiers.
Yeah, as a technologist, I would head to the safety of technology. I think I'm definitely with Kevin. I think digital infrastructure, digital experiences are going to be fundamental. So anything that removes friction and enables the occupier to get access to the services without any challenge, without any issue is going to be important. So all around the user experience for space, I think that's critical. I think security. So we're gonna be in the near term very much focused on physical security. So managing occupancy, managing the space, managing access to the space. But I think it's really important, and many enterprises, their primary concern is digital security. So I think the built world has to have a strong answer to the digital and infrastructure security challenges. And I think, as Kevin says, though, to echo the point, I think multimodal spaces, I think the occupiers now going to be looking for real estate platforms that can help them on their journey and can provide all of the space requirements as the business evolves. So I think there's three elements to that.
Interesting. And Jamie, what's your position on this? So maybe we can sort of morph into the next question, which would be about how well the current industry is able to match the demands of occupiers. How well are they in alignment?
Sure. Is there any chance you could mute though when I'm speaking, because your mic is picking up the audio, so we're getting an echo. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess to transition between the two, to me it feels like the core need is going to put the choice in the employee's hands. The choice to decide where to work, when to work from home, when to go in the office, etc. And a work environment, and that really starts with policies at the company level that enables that. I think what that means as a result is the actual workplace has to be, there's going to be more variability in usage. You might have 100 people in one day, you might have 20 the next. And I think it's going to become increasingly painful for companies to pay for 100 people worth of space that sits empty a lot of the time. So this might be very out there, but we're in thousands of customer conversations right now where it would have been inconceivable people would have been asking for this 4 months ago. And lots of Fortune 500s today are saying, is it possible I could take space for all my employees on Monday and Tuesday? Is it possible that at the beginning of the week, they could say in an app what days they're coming in, and we could sort of deliver to whatever that utilization is day by day? And then as a result, I think a lot of people are going to the office more and more for collaboration, for syncing up with their colleagues, and less for deep work. And as a result, that kind of sitting in a big benching situation silently for 8 hours a day seems extremely, I think, will be under a lot of pressure. To the question of whether the industry is ready to deliver to it on that, I think I think there is a lot that is very new. I think in particular, on-demand pricing models, the ability to actually deliver in a more variable way. So you're moving more to a kind of Uber model rather than lease a car model, is very logistically complicated. And I would say even the most sophisticated operators are still working out how to deliver to that type of demand. But in general, I think the flex industry, depending on how you define it, is in a pretty good position right now, in part because we got lucky. We built out a lot of the spaces with lots of dense individual private offices, and then common areas are for collaboration. Whereas the average American or British office is a big open floor plan space where the work is meant to get done in the open floor plan area. And I think that's not an ideal way to work. And there's going to be much more desire to kind of work in private areas and then collaborate. So that's been helpful.
Actually, following on from that, Kevin, I'd be interested because, as I understand it, your customer base is largely larger corporates. What feedback are you getting from your larger occupiers in terms of how they see a post-pandemic world? Are they suggesting they might be using space in a different way, or how much has the world changed for the larger operator?
It's a great question, Anthony. And we're basing a good deal of our expectations around what's going to happen in North America, South America, and Europe, based on our experience in Asia in particular. In China alone, they've had 4 or 5 pandemics or national health crises like we're experiencing now around the world over the last 20 years. So the ability to return to a new normal is something that we've already experienced there. We, as a company and in close collaboration with other large owner operators, we're particularly focused on what we were defining as flexible workspace or flexible space as it is an increasing proportion of what our office buildings and frankly retail centers would be prior to the pandemic. It still remains only a couple of % of the occupancy across the United States, for example. So it's an important and growing, but still relatively small proportion of our properties. What we've done is redefined the way that we're looking at flexible workspace per se, and looking at what the three components of occupiers need for a workplace environment for their employees are. We see it as three components. One is a long-term workplace that they have that's effectively private space for their employees to come and go from, to bring their customers to, and to interact with one another. We don't see that going away in the long run, and believe that that will continue to, comprise 80 to 85% of our buildings, plus or minus, and that the additional components that we need to be able to provide for our flexible workspace, that is something that the occupants take on a la carte basis, like Jamie was talking about. Very, very important to the makeup. And the third component that frankly we have to be able to provide for is what is the element where we're supporting work from home. And that's where I think the digital infrastructure is going to become an increasingly important part, where the owners of the properties and the primary workplace environment and flexible workspace environment can be fluid between the three different places that people choose to perform their work from.
That's really, I mean, it feels to me the actual inclusion of thinking about of work from home and how to include that into the office is a pretty major jump, isn't it, in terms of thought processes. So Mark, I was thinking what I'm really intrigued about with the whole flex area is this still real estate we're talking about here? This is much more human-centric, much more service-led. Is this real estate? Is this just property management, the latest version of property management, or is this something else? Because I'm really trying to look at what, in terms of data, technology, and human skills, what new types of data, technology, and human skills are needed for this much more fluid, service-oriented, human-focused working environment.
Yeah. Anthony, I'm going to catch you on your mute, and we all keep getting the feedback when you're. Here we go. I think that's better. I think the world we're in now is we have a bit of a disconnect still between the demand side and the supply side. For many years, the supply side really and still isn't really tooled up to deliver the flexible products and the high volume transactions and the different spaces that the demand side are requiring. So occupiers need more from the space. They need to think about it in a different way, and so it is definitely a different way of managing real estate, I think. But I think that there's a layer for many different types of products in the industry which aren't necessarily hospitality, aren't necessarily overserviced, aren't necessarily very rich experiences, but actually are suitable for the way the occupier wants to consume it, which is much more flexibly and with much less friction in the transaction. And I think that's the sort of the model that most asset owners, landlords are trying to figure out, is how do they tool up to deliver a much more efficient transaction and a much better experience because of that. And so I think that's starting to happen, but that's where there's lots of space for big operators, for the industrialists of the world, who can bring the scale and the operating capability that doesn't exist today.
Jamie, what do you think you're in the real estate? Are you in the real estate business, or are you in another business, or are you real estate plus?
I think it's closer to something like outsourced HR, outsource. You're essentially an outsourced workplace deliverer. But I think that really goes to the heart of this. Is there's increasingly two ways of talking about what our industry is. One is flex. It's flex space. You're giving people space on 2-year terms instead of 10-year terms. That to me is very clearly real estate. I think most landlords are in a perfect position to be able to deliver that. And if that's what the market wants, that is a real estate solution. It's a more flexible solution. But I think sometimes the use of the word flex has harmed the people on this call, potentially, if they're listening and trying to get their head around this, for customers, the ability to get to the heart of, okay, what's really going on? What for us at least, you are going to companies and saying, this thing that for the last 50 years you've done yourself, the delivery of your employees' workplace experience is something that you should hand off to us. And that is a outsourced business services business, just like they've handed off logistics to one company, fulfillment to one company, manufacturing to another company. This is the last big domino to fall on that front. And the real estate is an input to it, but it is one of many inputs to it. And I think, if anything, over time becoming, that's part of why we partner with landlords. In my mind, Brookfield takes care of the real estate part, Industrious takes care of the employee delivery part. And when we work in concert, that's when you get the outcome that's really transformative to the customer.
Kevin, how do you see this thing? Because it strikes me this is a complicated matter. That what we're trying to deliver within the real estate industry now is in many ways so much more complex and sophisticated and nuanced than it was before. I'm thinking about how you see someone like Brookfield in 5 years' time. Will they be the same type of companies now, or will they be made up of with more different skill sets and different types of people? Or how is the format of what's a real estate company going to look like in 5 years' time?
Well, I would say that if we do look like we look today in 5 years, then we'll be roadkill, because the pace of change is continues to increase. I think there'll be three additional skill sets as it relates to this flexible workspace component that will be present in the larger organization. Scale, particularly at a global level, is increasingly becoming a competitive advantage when we're dealing with large global companies, because they want the ability to have flexibility, across marketplaces and within cities. But the three skill sets I think that we'll have more of, and we'll outsource a good part of it, but will be around hospitality and services. Brookfield operates our own office buildings around the world to the greatest extent. Unless we're involved in an asset for a short period of time and an opportunistic investment, we'll outsource it. But otherwise, we operate our own buildings because we think we do the best job. We think we can develop a strong hospitality and services competency, but then on the local level, we'll partner with companies like Industrious and other ones to make sure that the services that are delivered, particularly in a flexible workspace environment, are the highest quality. So we'll have hospitality people. We'll have more technology experts resident within the organizations, because historically that's been a place that the industry has been slow to adopt and adapt. So again, we'll have leadership expertise within the organization, and then we'll outsource to partners like Mark and others. And then third, we're going to have an analytics capability. All right, so that people will, as technology allows us to aggregate data at scale more effectively going forward than it has in the past. Real estate organizations like Brookfield and Blackstone and Oxford and Hines and others are becoming increasingly thoughtful about how do we play Moneyball, or more, importantly, not using some slang, is how do we engage in the real estate quant era in a really effective way so that we can create value for the occupants of our buildings and their people, as well as for us as owners of assets, how those assets increase in value. Does that answer your question, Anthony, or what's the point?
Yeah, it does. It does very, very much so. And actually, feeding on from that Mark, what do we? This idea of to create these better workplaces, these more service oriented, more hospitality driven, more human centric workplaces. We talk a lot about we need more data to do this, but what data do we need, Mark? What should we be collecting, and what should we be doing with it that we don't do now as a rule?
So the interesting thing, there are huge amounts of data points that we already have in the built world, everything from Wi-Fi, access control, HVAC, M&E systems, workspace management, meeting rooms, we have many data points, and I guess it's easy to take that data and perhaps, if you like, regression test it, so look backwards. I'm not too sure quite at the moment how much that data will tell us about the future, because I think we're going through quite a rapid evolution of how people are going to use space. So I think there's going to be much more real-time importance. So in the current climate, it's really about how the space is occupied, how it's being used, where's the vacancy, where can I go and work quietly. And I think we're going to use more sensors, more access control technologies to do that. But I think the data really will only start to be really valuable once in that environment we have a reference point. So we start to be able to pull the data and say, okay, so what's that really telling us in the current in the current layout? What does that look like? You know, who's coming and going, who's using the spaces, how are they doing it? And I think that's got a long way to go, because quite frankly, there's not enough data that exists yet to get a good picture. I think that's going to come in future. So I don't think we can get predictive yet from the data. I think that's a little while out.
Would it be helpful? I could certainly describe how we've used data to date that's been helpful. And I think it will get more complicated, but I can at least concretely speak to, you know, even to today where it's transformed the ability to deliver to the customer. So, you know, to my mind, let's say there's the uncomplicated, simple way of delivering a workplace, either the old school way where everyone has their own private office, or the 1990 forward way where everyone, you know, sits in benching in a big open floor plan space, and they just, you know, they sit at that desk 10 hours a day, and whether they're on a phone call or doing email or trying to write a memo, they have a person 2 feet to their right or 2 feet to their left. Data isn't that helpful in delivery of that. But if something much more complex is coming, where you say, when you sit at your desk, that's for if you're, you know, responding to emails quickly or kind of low cognitive, low interactive work. But if you're going to sit and work on a investment memo for 4 hours, you need to be in a sensory deprivation focus room. If you're going to sync up with internal colleagues, you should be in a casual huddle room. If you're in a formal external meeting, you should be in a, you know, a formal, much more elegant conference room. And at that point, you say the average white collar worker needs to move through 5 or 6 different space types over the course of their day. You have to be able to say this point in space is the person's home base. How far are they willing to travel for an unscheduled 20-minute phone call? How far are they willing to travel for a scheduled webinar that they're on? How far are they willing to travel for a weekly one-on-one check-in, et cetera? And you can map out in a given building how far any employee would travel before you start to see diminutions in employee experience and employee engagement to all of those different space types. When we tried to do that instinctively, it was a disaster. We got it all wrong. And what, you know, now we've delivered 10 million days at work. Once you were able to actually observe how far people could move, in what way they move, whether they're willing to move through barriers to get to it, or if it has to be in their own space, what can be shared with other companies, what can't be. It's only in the application of that data that finally we've been able to start cracking the code in these very complex, essentially complexes of spaces, some of which are private, some of which are individual, some of which are shared, to try to figure out where you get to both the access just in real time to all the space types you could want in a way that doesn't diminish, but in fact sort of enhances the employee experience. There's no way a person could just make that up off the top of their head without starting and ending with real world data.
And I think, I mean, if I could, Anthony, the point of intersection or convergence here between owners and occupiers, I think the new frontier is very likely the flexible workspace environments within our properties, retail, you know, multifamily, office, where technology and, you know, occupancy have mutual interest, or there's mutual interest between the owner and the occupier. So we start to collaborate more around how we're measuring, you know, the behavior of the people in it, how we're measuring, you know, occupancy versus energy consumption, and be able to, you know, convert that into greenhouse gas reduction. But it's only going to be when the owners of the building and the occupants of the building collaborate at a much higher level okay, between both the people and the, the larger enterprise itself, to be able to achieve, some of these metrics and quantifiable achievements that you're talking about that we want to be able to do in 5 years, I think.
And what I was thinking as Jamie was talking, to do what you were just enunciating then, you have to have a relationship with your occupier, which is a complete from a traditional real estate company's relationship with their occupier. And I'm just wondering, who does which part of this? So, not, you were talking earlier about the data we have to collect, but whose responsibility is it to decide what data to collect and why? And then who's to collect it? And then whose responsibility is it to analyze it? And whose responsibility is it to act on it? Again, it seems to me you've got these sort of different input, these different stakeholders within the real estate business to create this user experience. But how do you see whose role is to do what?
Yeah, so I think the more forward-looking property organizations will be baking this in. This is their secret sauce, because actually technology companies like us can surface the data from pretty much anything. We've got an amazing view of how people are coming in, accessing space, booking space, using it, moving through a building and Wi-Fi. We can surface that, but it doesn't really, in our context, it doesn't make huge amounts of sense because it's isolated. So I think the responsibility has to be for the real estate part of the industry and perhaps the industrialists of the world to build that picture, because it's not just the technology layer that's going to be important. There's going to be many more inputs that are not just technology led to get a high resolution picture. And it has to be the Brookfields of the world and the industrialists that actually are the aggregator to that. Sorry, Kevin.
I would absolutely agree, but I think that there's mutual responsibility and opportunity with the large, most forward-thinking occupants, because I think there needs to be a correlation between supply and demand. And so it's incumbent upon us to create supply, but it needs to be done in response to thoughtful, sophisticated demand. I think we're still in just the first phase of being able to, understand what that correlation is. Jamie, you're probably at the nexus of that.
Yeah.
I think on this question of who does what, and in particular on the collection of data, I feel like we oftentimes feel like we're a little bit stuck in a paradox, or at least a very hardy tension, because if you're going to deliver flex space in a very narrow definition, it's fine. Given that, they're going to sign a year-to-year lease and it's going to be plug and play and there's going to be furniture, but it's a relatively arm's length relationship. If you're at the point where you've said to the occupier, the customer, we're on the hook for what it feels like to walk into work every day as a McKinsey employee or as a Novartis employee, and we're on the hook for not just the physical experience, but oftentimes the events, the food and beverage, for tracking who's, starting to flag in terms of not coming in the office, or which teams are in trouble, and how can we be your partner in helping them to spend more time together or get out of the office together, et cetera. There's so much trust necessary to do that. There is a reason why this is the last big element of a corporate P&L to be outsourced to a third party. It is closer to the bone than fulfillment or logistics or data storage. And so everything lives and dies on trust. And we need lots of data in order to be able to deliver a quality enough outcome that we would earn that trust. And yet the easiest way to erode trust is to collect data on things that companies aren't comfortable with, or to ask them, are you willing to share your employee engagement scores, or your employee sort of, happiness tracking, or things like that, or which ones of your employees quit versus which ones were fired. And if they think for one moment you're going to play games with or not be a good shepherd of that data, you're out the door. And a lot of our industry has not developed a great reputation on that front, where you would think like, yeah, I'm dying to give them my list of which employees quit and which ones got fired or something like that. So we're having trouble traversing that exact element. And now with COVID and the reminder that every employee is in such different personal circumstances, some have families, some don't. some have sick relatives, some don't, some are able to come in the office 5 days a week, some cannot come into the office until there's a vaccine, then you're getting to things that are not just personal, but governed by federal regulations. And it becomes hard to know what's truly private data for the occupier and what's necessary data to share with the workers deliver in order to give them the outcome they need.
It does feel to me that in order to create, I'm getting the feeling that we have a potential, an opportunity here to create much better workplace, because we will understand so much more about our spaces and our people. But it increasingly feels to me that in terms of, from a landlord or an asset manager's point of view, do you do it yourself? Do you outsource it, or do you partner? That one in the middle of just outsourcing it feels to me that much of what you've just been talking about is not possible unless there is a good relationship. It can be different formats of partnership, but the asset owner and the operator, to create what you're talking about, just to get past that privacy level, really do need to work together. And I see that as a big differentiator.
Our first 57 locations were leased. So it's an arm's length relationship with the landlord. Then starting in early 2018, we said we're not signing leases anymore. So everything since then, and the next 60 locations, let's say, have all been partnership agreements with landlords. When I look at the quality of the outcome for the occupier, there is no question in my mind the legacy lease portfolio is an inferior product. It's an inferior outcome for the occupier than the ones where we've partnered arm in arm with the landlord. And it would take too long to enumerate all of the ways in which coordinating with the asset owner enables us to do things that you can't do when it's on an arm's length basis. But suffice to say, it touches everything from access control to technology to syncing up the security experience at the front of the building to what your experience is at your desk, and 100 other things. And for that reason, I think that is where the industry hopefully is headed here, post-COVID, and we can get rid of the arm's length lease. I'm gonna lease 2 floors of your building and run a co-working space, because you just can't do what the occupier needs under something that, kind of simple.
Yeah, just in using Microsoft Office as an example, I mean, it's a very integrated 30-year-old platform now that people around the world in a workplace environment have become used to using. Apple's got their own too. But what is still not, I mean, what is still emerging, I'll say, is an integrated technology platform that is available to the real estate industry, and there's a good reason for it. Properties are, of all different ages and sizes. The equipment in it is, different manufacturers, different versions, different types. So the ability to create a single digital platform to do all the things we're talking about is incredibly complex. And so what we're in the process of doing now is instead of trying to create a one-size-fits-all, is identifying what functional areas. I use leasing information as one example. VTS is the platform that we and many others have adopted around the world to drive our leasing process. And for the first time in my professional life, which is getting closer to 40 years than it is 30, is we've got real-time access to not just what deals have been executed, but what the exchanges are in a marketplace. And it gives us a much more precise idea of where the market is going, and it'll allow us to do better predictive analytics. And so as we create a digital twin for our buildings, which we're piloting, and our occupants begin to see the value in creating a digital twin of their premises, our ability to regulate HVAC and power and deliver the kinds of services that historically we've just provided at a fixed fee and they've used on a demand basis, we'll be able to do it much more precisely and in collaboration with them. Well, because these are big cost items there's a lot of complexity in. We're just, again, at the first phase of being able to work with large occupants in multiple markets and learn to trust one another, that as we collect and aggregate this data, that the occupants will, they'll have visibility and access to that which involves their people, And we'll be able to see it on an anonymized and aggregated basis as it relates to occupancy of the building, but not any closer. And that requires both trust as well as a lot of different security level axes. And it's going to take time to both build that out as well as to, learn to trust one another, how we use it. Thanks.
That's great. Got two more questions. One's a data, and then the final one's going to be sort of a macro view. I have a question here from Catherine. It says the elephant in the room is not just who collects the data, presumably for the benefit of owners, occupiers, users, but who owns the data? Mark, who owns the data that's generated out of a building?
So I think it depends, right? There's a stay on that fence. I think we get a little caught up with the consumer world of data usage. So, and I think there is a clear demarcation for user data versus use of space data. And I think the use of space data from all senses, from access, from systems, from booking systems, from billing, I think they will always and will be likely to be owned by the systems that provide them, the providers and the technology providers provide them. Because you'll see this is a challenge, but most software and technology businesses are writing that into their agreements, their ability to use anonymized data, because it's valuable for them, and we're like any others trying to extract value from the data from our platforms. But I think the user data, the employee data in this world, I think is a difficult thing, because I think you're going to have explicit agreement for them from that user on that phone to surface that data in any other way than a very rudimentary one. So I think this is going to be a big question for the industry to answer, and I don't think it will be done easily or quickly.
Okay, Kevin, I'd be interested in your opinion on that one. Particularly thinking of
in all due respect. Yeah. In all due respect, and 3 years ago, I would have agreed with Mark in that the owners or the industry was fairly ignorant of the value of owning the data. And it was, I'll use mineral rights and the discovery of oil as the metaphor. So before we understood that oil was under the ground, right, and that it was valuable, you just owned the land, right? There were no mineral rights and there was no air rights. But as owners of physical assets, of property, have realized how important the data is to the occupancy, so not the private employee data or necessarily the behavior within the private leased space of tenants. We don't see that as what we would own. But Brookfield, along with Hines, Brookfield, RXR, Durst, some British Land, have taken a very strong point of view on this and are insisting in our agreements with our technology partners that we own the data unilaterally, and that we will license it and provide permission to aggregate and anonymize it, like I was talking about with VTS before. But since we're paying for the technology to be adapted for our use, and that it's our physical asset in which these activities and things are taking place, that we own it, consistent with regulatory guidelines that are around the world, very, very sensitive to that. But that it's one of those things that will evolve going forward. And I agree with Mark, it is complex, but I think that is a point probably of disagreement.
Do you see it as
yeah,
sorry,
go back on that, because I think the challenge is from technology and software providers in the SaaS world, the software as a service, is we're trying to develop products based on what we see, how the market's evolving, what the use cases are, and what the data is telling us. And I think for that speed of evolution, there has to be an element where the data, and we're not looking to monetize this as providers. We're looking to evolve and rapidly deploy quickly. And I think there's going to be a new wave of solutions, which is going to be imperative for the data to drive the the direction and the development. And there is Kevin, you're right, there's a balance, because let's be honest, you know, hey, you want it because it takes the best picture, and we sort of want to provide it and sell it to you, but be able to sell it for the rest of the industry. But if you pay enough in the first place, then we don't have this issue.
Now, there's definitely needs to be balance and fairness. I agree 100%.
Can I have a quick wrap-up question? There's often a lot of commentary that because of the way the capital markets work within real estate, that they don't like all this flex stuff. They just want long leases, and you know, the old world was good, and this is in danger of jeopardizing the capital position of the real estate. Over a 5-year period, do you see the growth of flex being something that is still causing problems to the capital markets, or will the capital markets and the institutions come to love and understand flexible space?
Jamie, you want to go first?
Just a quick wrap up, gents.
I would say the capital markets, I think the buildings will have a much higher NOI. Instead of delivering raw space for $50 a square foot, you're delivering the end employee experience for $150 or $200 a square foot. And there will probably be a different cap rate on that NOI, but the higher NOI will supersede or will overwhelm any changes in the different cap rate you would apply to more bonded long-term revenue.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, we're expecting to have a higher NOI on our flexible workspace component of our assets. And as long as it does not exceed 18% of the buildings, we have not been penalized or not seen penalties imposed by capital markets. So, I mean, I think capital markets are coming around to the need to have it. And it's also incumbent upon, you know, a strong owner to be able to champion why that is, in fact, you know, providing for a more relevant asset going forward.
Yeah, and it's about short-term agreements, not short-term occupiers.
Right.
Okay.
I'm taking that phrase.
No, definitely. You can rent it on a service model.
Yeah.
Mark, Jamie, Kevin, that was fantastic. Very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Cheers, guys. Jamie, nice fight.
Thanks, everybody.